behind you. Look out. How's it going?
Welcome, Richard and Pete. Excited to have you both here today.
Woohoo!
And welcome everyone else. I'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to trickle in. But we're here today to talk about setting AE and SDR goals that don't suck. So,
No
like I
sucky
said,
goals. No
no,
sucky goals
none.
allowed.
None,
Nope.
none. So while we're waiting, we're going to give people just a couple of minutes to join. I'd love to do a quick icebreaker with you both. So Pete and Richard, what's on your agenda for the 3-day weekend? Labor Day is coming up. Pete, take us away.
Richard, age before beauty. Oh wait, no,
Oh,
that's me.
okay.
Excuse me. Age before beauty. I'll go. So this weekend, I think we have Stanford football tickets. We are season ticket holders, and which we attend for the tailgates mainly, so all the kids can kind of like run around in circles and like get dirty. So that's going to be on Saturday. Stanford's going to get their ass kicked by USC, and then we're going to be headed off to Ukiah, north of Santa Rosa. So a lot of excitement. How about you, Richard? What are you up to?
I am headed to Las Vegas, Nevada for a fantasy football draft. The first time ever that I'm actually meeting
Booyah.
a lot of the friends in this football league. We've played fantasy football together for many years, and we haven't met in person. And there's a lot
How
of kind of like
funny.
hybrid, like family, like younger cousins and little younger brothers who are like in the league, and everyone's like over 21 now. So finally gonna get everyone out and meet, and we're gonna have a bunch of dinners and do the live draft. So it's gonna be amazing.
That sounds absolutely epic. It's going to be like when everybody like first met their coworkers like post COVID. They're like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, you're 6'4", or like, "Whoa, you're like 5'3". What the heck? You seem so much
Definitely.
bigger on Zoom. Your personality.
That's so funny. Richard, are you guys going to that hotel with like the 6 pools and the 6 screens like that? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
Oh,
we
yes,
are.
you know
We
which one
are.
I'm talking
It's
about.
called Stadium Swim. It is an epic, just like sports person's fantasy come to life.
I
So
want to
I'm
do
really
this.
excited to witness that. Yeah.
Stadium swim. Wow. Okay. Amazing. And Hannibal, what about you? What's your
Nice.
big highlight? Oh, I
Um,
know.
yes. So
I know what
I'm
you're doing.
going camping this weekend, but it's this really cool
Special
thing.
camping.
Yeah, in Oroville, Lake Oroville in California, because I'm based in San Francisco. But it's floating campsites, so they're in like the middle of the lake.
Crazy.
There's like
Oh,
15 of us going. It's really cool. I'll send a pic to you guys internally, but look them up.
It's
Floating
like
campsites.
houseboats where you bring your own house. It's like a
Yeah, like
houseboat,
it's a
but you put
house.
like tents on it.
It's like a house base and then you bring a tent. Like, but it's like double decker. It's really cool. So like you hang out on bottom and then the tents are on top.
that sounds
Hannah
epic.
showed me, like, that's bananas. That looks so crazy.
Yeah, it should be super fun. But anyways, let's get back on track.
All
Let's
right.
get started today.
Let's talk about sucky goals. Wait, no,
Yes.
non-sucky goals.
Yeah, goals that don't suck. So
Goals that don't
today we're
suck.
here to talk about setting AE and SDR goals that don't suck. We're super excited about the content and takeaways you'll get out of this event. So let's dive into it. Before we dive into the content, though, today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, also known as our Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros' mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. MSP does this through live sessions like what you're about to experience today, an online forum, quarterly summits, and we're just starting to get back to in-person events. If you're not already a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join right after this event. Speaking of summits, MSP has their super exciting Rev X Fest coming up.
So great.
It's incredible. The speaker lineup is absolutely nuts.
Bananas. Yeah,
Um,
bananas.
yeah, I just dropped a link in the chat for everyone to register. And then one more event I would love everyone to register for is MSP is known for their legendary Dreamforce happy hours, and we are finally back this year after a 2-year hiatus.
Mhm.
So I just dropped that registration link in the chat
gonna be
as
rad.
well. It's going to be super fun. We rented out De La Rosa in San Francisco. Going to be awesome. So like I said, MSP, register for the summit, register for Dreamforce, and we'll see you there. But for today's content, would love to say thank you to our sponsor, Atrium, and I'm going to let Pete say a word or two about Atrium. So go ahead, Pete.
Sure. Thanks, Han. Yeah. So for folks who don't know, Atrium, it's fewer and fewer nowadays, but Atrium makes what we like to call data-driven sales management software. It's software that exists to help sales managers, so AE managers, SDR managers, AM, CSM managers, and associated leadership use metrics to improve the performance of their teams. To manage by metric, to measure, manage, and improve performance by using data and metrics. And so one of the things that's super cool about Atrium is it's super easy to set up. You just log in with your Salesforce credentials. A read-only Salesforce connection takes about 5 minutes to set up, and like poof, presto changeo, you have a world-class sales metrics harness to understand like how your reps are performing across dozens and dozens of metrics. So we may touch a little bit more on some more Atrium stuff later on, but we're going to talk about goals that don't suck, right, Hannah? I think you have some housekeeping for us.
Yes, I have a little bit of housekeeping, and as Pete mentioned, it's super, super easy to sign up for Atrium. Drop the link in the chat if you want to take a spin. So I skipped our housekeeping slide. Sorry about that. Housekeeping.
No worries.
So great to have Atrium as a sponsor, and we're really excited to dive in, but let's go over some housekeeping. This event is being recorded, and slides and recording will be provided post-event, along with some awesome key takeaways, and they'll be available on MSP's website via the previous events page. Second, if you have a question for our panelists, please, please, please use the chat, use the Q&A. Richard and Pete will both be active via chat and Q&A and answering questions live. So go ahead and engage with them and have a blast today. So I'm going to go a little bit out of order of these slides. So before we dive into the table of contents, Pete and Richard, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves.
Wonderful. So, hey everyone, for folks that don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I am one of the founders and the CRO of Atrium, which we talked about a second ago, so I won't rehash that for you. But so a little bit of background on me. This is my second software startup. My last one was a company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. It was a recruiting software company, and that's really where I got introduced to sales. That was like nearly 10 years ago at this point, kind of crazy. Introduced to sales there as our first, as a business generalist founder, and then our first seller, first sales manager, sales leader, et cetera. And then when we were acquired by Monster Worldwide, I was responsible for new product sales across 1,000-person sales organization, which was kind of a spicy meatball. Wrote a book on sales, on startup sales called Founding Sales. And also started MSP. So that's a little bit on me. Richard, so lucky to have you here today as one of our lovely senior CSMs who works with so many of our illustrious customers. Maybe you can kind of tell folks a little bit about what you do and some of the companies that you've done sales operations work at previously.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Pete and Hannah, for having me here today. Thrilled to be in front of all of you to talk about goals that don't suck. Again, my name is Richard Lynn. I'm a senior CSM here at Atrium. Been with the organization for a little bit over 9 months now. I have a background, to Pete's point, in sales operations, sales finance, as well as data infrastructure. So spent many years of my career building data warehouses and data tools, and kind of always working tangentially with go-to-market teams, sales, CSM, SDR teams, and central operations and strategy teams. Found myself wanting to go to a smaller shop and have a bigger impact, and just so happened upon Atrium, which seemed like a really good fit given what we are trying to accomplish today in the market from a data-driven sales management perspective, and met Pete and came along for the ride. So happy to be here.
Yep. Richard is peak sales nerd with the rest of us, right? We have sales nerd shirts. Everybody here at Atrium is big sales nerd. So and Richard is a prince among men when it comes to sales nerdery.
Awesome.
Hannah, are we ready to rock?
Shirts.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop screen sharing. Pete is gonna run the show from here, and I'll be back at the end for just a couple closing remarks. So take it away, Pete.
Cool. Thanks, Hannah. All right. Did I share the right screen, or do you guys see like a bunch of like my disaster of an inbox. Okay, cool. Looks like the right screen. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about setting and managing with goals. Super excited to run through this content with folks, and also fantastic to have Richard here because he works with dozens and dozens and dozens of really like amazing world-class modern sales organizations who happen to be Atrium customers, and so he has seen a bunch of stuff and can comment appropriately. One thing before we get started, one of the things that we like to do with our customers and also the community at large is help organizations do a better job of managing. Atrium, of course, from a software perspective, does that with by helping organizations do a better job of using metrics to manage. But also what we like to do is we work with our good buddy Richard Harris to sponsor a free monthly sales management bootcamp. Normally it'd be something like this would be like $1,000. It's a half-day boot camp, 4 hours. It's virtual with a handful of other managers. So if folks want to sign up for that, it's open to sales managers, SDR managers, sales leaders, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat here, and you can scan it with QR code if you want to do that too. But it's super fun, and all we ask for in exchange is a quick disco call with one of our account executives. So with that, let's talk about goals. Let's talk about setting and managing with goals. So one of the big things to kind of like start with here is to kind of characterize why are goals important, right? And the reason why goals are really important is because when you have like big overarching like lagging goals, like a bookings number or a pipeline generation number or what have you that you want to get to, those can be pretty daunting. And so the thing that you want to do is break them down, like decompose those like big daunting goals into precursors, because that way you know that you're on your way there, or importantly, you're not on your way, which is also important to know because then you can course correct, right? You can intervene. And and so that's what we want to do is we want to set goals, and also we want to set goals for the individual players on the field, if you will, because those are the ones who are driving the performance that we need. And so for anyone who is a sports fan, there's kind of an easy way to kind of think about this is that not only do you have outputs that are important to keep track of, like obviously we want to win the game, right? Whether we're talking about baseball or basketball or what have you. But what we want to make sure that we're doing is we're executing on those inputs to make sure that we're on our way to winning that game. And so, that might be things in baseball. It might be if you're a batter, right? Offensive player might be hits or bases or extra base hits or whatever. If you're a pitcher, that might be strikeouts and strikes and what have you. And you want to avoid having walks. And then, but you also want to measure and set goals on efficiency and quality metrics as well. And so those might be things like batting average. If you're if you're an offensive player, it might be earned run average. If you're a pitcher, what have you. So like it's the point is that like setting goals and measuring these inputs and these efficiency metrics are really important because that's how you know how you're on your way to kind of win the game. And then the other reason why setting goals on a human level is really important is because these big goals, like these big output goals, like winning a game or getting to, I don't know, adding $1 million in ARR in a quarter, or it's $5 million in ARR in a quarter, those like big like monolithic goals are actually the output of a bunch of humans, right? Like you have 10 account executives on your team or 40 account executives on your team. You have 20 SDRs on your team. And so like you can't just say, hey, I want to get to this pipe gen goal or I want to get to this ARR goal without having without breaking that down and looking at folks on an individual basis. And that's really important to get granular and get human, because then what we can do is we can see where our shortfalls are, right? Like this AE right here is off with respect to win rate, so we can fix his or her win rate and thereby make it such that he can contribute to that ARR goal in an effective fashion, right? This SDR right here is light with respect to email, email volume or new accounts touched. We can address that, and so what we can do is we can tackle issues before they really become problems. Richard, what is your favorite kind of like sports analytics slash slash sales analytics like crossover metric?
I think the classic one that we all think about is Moneyball. And the reason that that is near and dear to my heart as well is because I grew up in the Bay Area from the East Bay, and I took Bart to a ton of A's games. And so we will study the Moneyball approach here at Atrium, and it does have an emotional connection for me. But all of it, Pete, to your point, is it all rolls up to the same goal, which is winning the game or scoring a
Yeah.
run or scoring a touchdown and what have you. And for me and my customers, what I talk a lot about is coaching to inputs. When we talk about coaching, we can't coach our reps to money, right? You can't tell your rep to go close $1
No.
million. That doesn't happen. You know, that's not really in the rep's control, but a high quantity of high quality inputs is. And that's where we kind of focus a lot of our discussions. And for me, goals is one of my favorite things to do with customers because it's tangible, it's real, it's something that a rep can do, it's something that a manager can bring their rep to focus on. And that's why this discussion is one of my favorites and definitely something that I key in on constantly with my customers.
Pay attention to those inputs. One of our other CSMs is a lovely gentleman named Carson Kaufman. Talks about if you don't pay attention to your leading indicators, you're going to have a bad time. I guess it's like something from like South Park or something. But cool. So let's talk about actually how you're going to do this, right? How you're going to manage with set and manage with goals. And so this is really like the steps that are required in order to do that. First, you got to select some metrics that you're going to be paying attention to. Next, you got to make sure that you actually are collecting data in a way that makes it such that you can interrogate it and kind of count things. Then you're going to set goals on these things, on the collected data, on those metrics. Then what you're going to do is you're going to have some visualizations in place so you can actually see what's going on and are we getting to those goals, right? Are we getting to our goals? Are we not? And then the next thing that you need to do is it's insufficient to just like create those visualizations, because one of the jokes I like to say is that, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, doesn't make a noise. If you create an SDR like performance dashboard and nobody looks at it, like do the SDRs actually make any calls, send any emails, etc. So you got to really make sure that things are being distributed and actually being consumed. Right. And then lastly, even if you're distributing and consuming these assets and these views, the next thing you got to do is you got to make sure that you're actually interpreting it. And this is like, as a sales manager, SDR manager, or leader, this is kind of like the next level of kind of like Maslow's hierarchy. You got to make sure that like you're actually interpreting them and saying, I see what the problem is here. I'm going to coach the resolution of that. So these are kind of the steps. This is a visualization associated with it. We should probably have like a really happy little monk here on the top of the mountain, because he's pumped that he's made it to data-driven sales management nirvana. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about metric selection there, and I think Richard did a really good job of kind of characterizing why this is so important earlier. In general, like these are some principles to kind of think about as relates to what sort of metrics you should be paying attention to. So first, there's different people who are on this call right now. You have different teams. Maybe in your sales operations, you're a sales leader, you kind of have multiple teams that you care about. But the first thing you need to think about is like, what are the teams that you're going to be instrumenting? Because like the different roles that you're instrumenting, they're going to have different metrics that you're going to want to pay attention to. And then also, moreover, depending on their sales motion, you're also going to like the intervals on which you're measuring these metrics will be different, right? So like, if you're obviously, bookings are really important to pay attention to. No duh. But if you're looking at bookings for an SMB/AE, maybe that's measured on a monthly basis. If you're talking about mid-market reps, it might be quarterly. If you're talking about measuring customer-facing meetings, what I like to call the fundamental unit of selling behavior is a meeting, right? A customer-facing meeting. If you're looking at AEs, you're probably measuring that on a monthly basis. If it's a little bit higher velocity, you could probably tighten down to on a weekly basis. If we're talking about SDRs, we're probably looking at activity on a weekly basis, and we're probably looking at outputs like op creation on a monthly basis, unless maybe we're in enterprise land, in which case maybe like we're looking at those outputs on a quarterly basis. So just kind of think about like, what are the different teams, and then moreover, like what do they spend their time doing? Right? Because, sorry, what do they spend their time doing? That like, what should they be spending their time doing? Right? Because the thing that they're supposed to be doing is the thing that we want to measure. Right? So if you have reps who are, say you have an SMB, inside sales organization that's like selling to mom and pop businesses, well, we probably wouldn't anticipate like a lot of like scheduled meetings necessarily, right? We might just expect a lot of calls, a lot of call behavior, kind of like being logged in the CRM. We'll measure that. Whereas if we're talking about like a mid-market sales organization that kind of sells like, I don't know, fancy software to other kind of like fancy companies, sounds like Atrium, then you might anticipate having, measuring customer facing meeting volume, having things on the calendar, those sort of things. The other kind of things that I might note here, in addition to these kind of these things, is honestly, a lot of times people just like totally overthink metric selection. You see this a lot in like larger organizations where a lot of times the organization will like, they'll be at a pretty low maturity level for whatever reason, because like big companies are hard to get people aligned on, like, various needs. It's also very difficult for, oftentimes they'll have like legacy infrastructure in place, like old janky BI, MicroStrategy, your favorite, right, Richard? Old janky BI that like where like all the tiles are broken and so on and so forth. And so oftentimes like you can just get started, right? Like you can just get started and start with basics, and you're going to be like way better off than like trying to boil the ocean. Like, well, let's have meetings about meetings to like to which KPIs we're going to select. And so just like don't overthink it, just start on it. Richard, what would you add to this?
I think you're hitting on all the right points, especially this third bullet here on starting basic and getting more advanced. And it takes me back, not only do I see this with my customers, but also when I was first joining Atrium, part of our onboarding and training, I read Cracking the Sales Management Code. And they show the story of this startup that saw some wild success, but then the year after, their new VP of sales had these crazy lofty bookings goals and how they kind of derive backwards into the right goals. But you always start with those basics, right? To your point, that fundamental unit of sales success, having that meeting in front of customers. Maybe that means dials for an SMB. For an SDR team, that might mean dials as well. But then as you kind of get tighter and tighter around these basics and you know where people have to be, then you can extend into things like shortening your sales cycle, cross-selling a little bit more, multi-threading really well, as you move up into the enterprise space. So definitely the basics is a great place to start. And oftentimes we'll feel inundated or overwhelmed by whether it's features in Atrium around goals or just all the metrics that you could choose from. But really just getting back to basics and getting down to those fundamentals will help engender a lot of trust in how you set goals and then ultimately lead to really great outcomes.
Yeah, totally. And actually, I think we actually have like a couple hundred copies of Cracking Sales Management Code in a warehouse. So maybe what we can do is drop the hyperlink for if anyone wants to sign up to get a copy of Cracking the Sales Management Code. We can get that shot out to you. But like, okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for that comment there, Richard. These are some metrics to kind of think about. You'll notice that they kind of look a little similar to our baseball runs, our basketball points, etc. So inputs are going to be things that are kind of like the activities that people are engaged in. We've talked about SDRs. Those are going to be things like emails, calls, unique contacts that are engaged with, unique accounts that are engaged with. If that's, and then maybe you get a little bit fancier there, you might be talking about things like net new contacts that are being engaged with, net new accounts that are being engaged with, all those sort of things. Efficiency and quality metrics would be things like, email responsiveness rates. Maybe you get a little bit fancier. Richard, you were kind of talking about this earlier. Contacts touch per account. If you're like an enterprise SDR behavior, want to see a little bit of multi-threading going on there. We want to see people who are and then maybe it's not sufficient to say, hey, how many emails are we sending? How many unique accounts are we touching? How, like, are we touching things once? Are we setting it down? Or are we touching our accounts multiple times, et cetera? On the AE side of things, maybe the activity measurement is not as granular as on the SDR side, but it still should be there. Customer facing meeting volume, maybe touches on ops, things like that. Opportunity ownerships, of course, is like very straightforward. But then if you want to get a little bit more fancy pants, it might be things like new opportunity inflow, right? So like who knows, like maybe you got 20 or 30 or 40 ops in the AE's pipe, but if you're not paying attention to new opportunity inflow coming in, it's going to be hard for you to notice like the slow degradation of that pipe over time. And so measuring something like new opportunity inflow is kind of pretty critical there. From an efficiency and quality standpoint, The basics there are going to be things like win rate, it's just AE batting average, right? Average selling price. And then if you want to get a little bit fancier than that, it's going to be looking at like key opportunity stage conversions, like, hey, are we getting things out of disco, getting them down funnel? Are we getting things out of, out of POC, et cetera? So those are kind of some ways to think about think about that. Moreover, we actually have some kind of like guides on how the different metrics kind of interface with each other, right? So bookings down here at the left, and then we have the upstream drivers of all of these, all these things here, and we have the SDR version of that as well. And actually, I think what we can do is drop a link if folks want to sign up for copies of these. These are actually laminates. I have some on my desk right here. Here's the AE one. All right, can you tell that Pete's mom was a first grade teacher? Yes, you can. So if you want to get copies of those, they're really helpful to have on your desk since it's easy to lose PDFs. All right, wonderful. So that's metric selection there. So then the next step is data collection, and so in this case, we got to make sure that we're actually collecting this information such that we can then measure it. The good news is it's gotten a little easier over time. The good news, your sales engagement systems like your sales lofts, your outreach, your mix max, your grooves, et cetera, Apollo, so on and so forth. They're gonna log this information to the CRM. Like they're probably gonna be logging off your emails. You're gonna be logging your calls. You're gonna be logging, and then maybe even like pulling data off the calendar, shoving it into the CRM perhaps. So you can definitely leverage that. Obviously, specific like data-driven sales management software like Atrium makes this super duper easy. In our case, like you literally just sign in, takes 5 minutes, and like it's on its merry way. And then there's like manual capture as well. The one thing I would note to folks is just like be wary of manual capture. I'm sure Richard, as a former sales operations person, will appreciate that. The more things you ask reps to capture, the less they're going to do it. And then moreover, the more and more you ask them to capture, the more apt they might be to just like select the first thing in the pick list, right? So you end up with like a bunch of, lead source equals like aardvark or whatever, close loss equals like whatever starts with A there. So just like, be appropriate with the level of like manual capture, and always think about when you're doing manual capture, what is the question that we're going to answer with this bad boy? Cool. So that's kind of quick on there. I mean, one of the things that I would recommend is like take advantage of the fact that there are solutions that allow you to do this very quickly, and like you can leverage that. So then the next step is like goal setting, because we've got our data collected, we've got our metrics that we wanted to start out with. Like maybe it's basic, maybe it's medium. Probably not a great idea to start with double black diamond, like the super spicy version. So let's talk a little bit about goal setting principles here. So, and I think Richard touched on this earlier around this notion of like, I think you said appropriate goals, or like appropriate / comfortable / like defensible, right? Like you don't want to just like come off the top rope here because we want to show people the, that these things are legit. Is that fair?
Yeah, just like I think when a lot of companies set OKRs or similar goals for other
Sure.
functions around, let's hit 70% of these. I find a lot of managers' immediate default is, you know what, we're making 100 dials a week right now. Let's get this up to 500. And it's like, I know where you're coming from, but I don't know if that is
Let's talk you
physically
off the cliff here,
possible.
Tiger.
Right. So like let's keep it realistic so that your reps are motivated, right? They're motivating. Again, they're meant to be
Sure.
tangible. They're meant to be
Yep.
aspirational in a way, but 500 versus 100 is a little bit beyond aspirational, I think.
Jeez Louise, yeah, totally. And you can kind of see how some of the challenges, like some of the customer facing like sales like challenges that our customer success function has, where it's like you have like the best laid plan. Like people have these like lofty aspirations, like, okay, cool, maybe we're not going to cannonball into the jacuzzi, maybe we go in with our ankle first. What do you think? Right? Like let's test it out, right? And then go up to our knee, and then like all the way in, right? Up to our waist. Let's not cannonball because we don't want anyone scalded. That's fantastic. Yeah, so these are the ways that like we recommend kind of setting goals, and this is actually how like our customer success team works with organizations to kind of set goals on those various metrics. one, like a great way to do this and kind of look at like what's tenable and possible is just look at historical performance, right? Like go back and look at like how much, what the email or calling volume or opportunity creation volume for your SDRs have been over the trailing 6 months, like on a monthly basis or weekly basis or whatever. Like look at how many customer facing meetings your account executives have been able to have over the trailing 90 days, over the trailing 6 months. What, like, of our 10 account executives on the mid-market team, like trailing 90 days, what have win rates been? Right? We can't just like pull a rabbit out of our hat and say like, hey, win rate should be 30%, right? Like if somebody's if win rates have been 10% across the team, like probably not tenable there. So use historical performance there. Now that being said, what you don't necessarily have to look at the average. You probably don't want to look at top performers, but you kind of want to like be in the middle there, right? A little aspirational there, a little stretch. You can always like dial them up later as people kind of become accustomed to the jacuzzi, if you will. You can then like you can ramp them up a little bit there. The other thing you can do is you can look at bottoms up. You can kind of say, hey, look, how much time is there in the week, and what should our AEs be doing? So if you like use our account executives here at Atrium, so one of the things that we do here is like we sell on customer data. So people turn on their own, like they turn on an Atrium account, and like our account executives work with folks to kind of like go through their data, learn about what's happening with their team, so on and so forth. So our AEs are having meetings. They're doing a little bit of like instance tune up and kind of like asset creation and what have you. So that takes time. They're doing inbox management. They're doing like, they work on mutual plans. We use a software called Accord. So like those are the things that like fill their calendar. And so you should think about like, okay, cool. If there's 40 hours in a week and like this many, bathroom breaks and, this many lunch breaks and whatever, how many customer facing meetings are appropriate? Right? How much email volume is appropriate? How many op touches is appropriate? And then you think about how many customer facing meetings are required to like execute an opportunity. Maybe it's like 5 meetings to get a deal done. Maybe it's a couple meetings before something closed loss. Then you can kind of back into how many ops somebody could potentially carry without the kind of like plates spinning and kind of falling into the ground and like losing track of things. The good news is, of course, like when people are overwhelmed, you can kind of see that in their metrics. So their untouched opportunities or stuck ops kind of go bup, 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 bup. So that's bottoms up. And then the other thing you can do too is you can use benchmarking. Not everybody can do this. This is something like we have a kind of a nice like benefit here where we have hundreds and hundreds of customers, where we have anonymized benchmarking data that our customer success function can use to kind of help organizations say like, hey, like this is the right number of like meetings for an organization of your stage that kind of sells in your market. You can probably like, this is defensible right here. And then what you can do is you can kind of blend those together and then like start with it and then iterate it. Richard, anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that often the goal setting that I do is very much grounded in the reality of the customer's rep behavior. We'll do something where we do what we call the top performer check, where we try to derive the number of meetings on calendar that a rep should have every week. And we look at their top 3 reps and say, how many meetings do these reps have on their calendar? And we take the average there. But in addition to that, every rep is different. And sometimes I'll get feedback, and I do this live with my customers because I want that frontline feedback. Is like, this person's better on calls. This person's better on email. This person customizes their sequences to agree, where they're highly efficient through email. And so we'll tailor the goals to each rep so that it's always kind of rooted in what actually happens, and also playing to people's strengths. We want X number of opportunities created by these SDRs, or we need X number of bookings. How do we play to their strengths rather than saying, hey, you're not a meeting person, you're really good on email, but here's 10 meetings a week. That doesn't really work in practice, and that's how folks get demotivated, and ultimately goals kind of lose their power. So always kind of grounding in reality, and that's just an exercise that I like to do with all my customers.
Totally. And I think I was talking with our head of customer success about this the other day, about how sometimes it's really that demotivation thing. Sometimes people will come off the top rope and say, hey, I want to set these like super lofty goals here. But then if you, I guess it's kind of like it's essentially like you're missing the point. It's instead of saying, hey, we need to win the game, and so we want to, score this many runs and have this many hits. It's like saying, cool, we need to have 100 hits. And like you kind of just created this insert, like you defeated the purpose of breaking the big goal down into like little goals. And and then like and then I think the problem then of course is that then people like the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and then people are like, yeah, I'm gonna disregard all this stuff, right? Like to hell with this like sales math stuff. Like get it out of here. Awesome. And so then the last step here is like you really got to publish these things, right? So I mean, you'd be shocked how many customers we meet with who are like, hey, do you have a sense, like, do you have goals? And this is a discovery conversation that our AEs will have. How do you set goals? Oh, well, we have an expectation that our AEs are having 10 customer facing meetings a week. Oh, okay, cool. How do you measure that? Oh, we don't really. Oh, okay. Do the AEs know that that's like kind of what they're supposed to be doing? I mean, kinda, right? And so just like being very explicit about it, like, hey, like this is what the fingerprint of success looks like, by publishing it, and then moreover, like referring to it can be a very powerful thing. These are some kind of like examples of kind of like goals that you might be able to set here. Again, like be wary of benchmarks because every sales motion is different, the physics are different, et cetera, but in general, like AE should probably be having between 7 to 15 customer facing meetings a week. They should be sending anywhere between 50 to 150 emails a week. The number of accounts / ops they should be touching per week is probably in the 20 to 50 range, again kind of depending on how like velocity they are. And then moreover, like you got to really pay attention to that new op inflow, because you don't want the pipe to get crusty. So that means you got to have have constant stuff coming in there. And that's really like, again, very motion dependent, but like maybe 2 to 10. I mean, 10 ops per week is probably pretty crazy unless you're talking about a velocity SMB motion. But in the 2-ish realm, and then the slower the sales motion, you might back that out to a monthly number. And then on the SDR side, you can actually get a little bit crisper here, because it's really like the behaviors that they're engaging in is like pretty much just prospecting behavior. These are some pretty good kind of benchmarks for email volume per week, call volume per week. Again, kind of pretty contingent on your sales motion, how automated it is you are. We have some customers who have very limited total addressable markets. So if they have, if there's only a couple thousand accounts that they can possibly like potentially sell into in the market, obviously these must be very high average selling price deals, or else that's not really a viable business. Obviously then the volumes of these execution would be a lot lower, and then you would see way higher quality ratios, like way more contacts being engaged per account, way more touches per account on a recurring basis there. Wonderful.
Pete,
so then
yes,
sir.
We have a question here in the Q&A, which
Wonderful.
I'll let you answer first, and I have a thought on it as well. But Bill is asking us, would you suggest or recommend linking goals with historical performance tied to tenure?
Interesting. So tied to tenure. Yeah, I mean, I think, thank you for catching that. I guess my reaction to that is, I think probably the question under the question there is like, hey, how do we set goals on people who are in ramp, right? So if they're not very tenured, they might be in ramp there. We actually do a master class on data-driven ramp management, which is a pretty good one. I think what I would say there is, one, when you're setting goals, here, let's go back to the slide in question. When you're setting goals, when you're looking at historical performance, you probably only want to include tenured folks in there, to like set those benchmarks. And then you should probably create a conception of what the ramp period is that's going to get them there. This is actually a pretty key use case for Atrium that our customers use us for, is measuring the ramp of reps, AEs and SDRs. But the way that you do that is you don't compare them to the like fully ramped people who have their calendars full and their pipelines are full and so on and so forth, but instead you compare them to other people who were ramping at the same point in time. Richard, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to pull from my book here at Atrium. I've got a customer with a massive SDR organization, 200 plus SDRs globally, and we have a sort of three-pronged approach. Yeah, we've got a three-pronged approach to goals. The first is a set of ramping goals, which is very much focused on like early in tenure. What are your goals from an activity standpoint, dials, emails, meetings created, as well as a set of almost like run rate or quota goals. Like if you hit these goals, these are directly tied to your quota. You hit this, you're doing well. And the third one is what we call the promotion track, where we kind of take the
I love
average of
that.
the top performers globally, and we really just spell out, if you hit these numbers, ops created, and the activities that tie into that, you will have a conversation at the end of the quarter to talk about moving you into a senior role or up to an AE. So it's on one hand, it is a high velocity promotion role, so it's very discreet around like, I do this, I can get promoted, but also it just it grounds everything in discrete benchmarks for the entire company. So super helpful approach I've seen. Hopefully this helps Bill.
Yeah, for sure. I love that, like data-driven like performance management, because like mainly we talk about it as relates to coaching and like making people more performant and what have you, which is fantastic. But of course, a related version or related to that is like how they're improving and how they're being promoted. That's fantastic. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and talk about getting this information into the hands of the people who need it, and that would be visualizations. And so the way to kind of think about this is, the fairly common version of them. There are more modern versions of this as well. Atrium has some of them, but the kind of standard operating procedure here is like reports and dashboards. Reports and dashboards. These are kind of like the meat and potatoes of data-driven management. Kind of assets. And so one thing to do is to kind of think about reports as, what question does this answer? Right, so each report is answering a question like, how many ops have the SDRs created so far this month? It's a very discrete question, like on a per SDR basis. How many opportunities does each AE own right now at this point in time? It's another question. That would be like a pipe fullness question. How much pipeline is closing in the coming 90 days per rep? That'd be a forecasting question. Right? We'd want to see like, hey, what does the coming pipe look like on a per rep basis? How many emails did each SDR send last week? Not this week, last week. So each of these is a different question, which then these questions and their answers then get composed into dashboards. And so an important thing here is, way to think about a dashboard is, this asset gets consumed at this point in time. One of the things that people like screw up pretty heavily is they just like create like kitchen sink dashboards and just got like everything in there. And the problem is like when you do that, like there's like, it's just overwhelming. And so people can't answer the specific questions that they need, which means that they can't interpret it and then manage appropriately. And so the way to think about this is, this dashboard right here is used in an AE one-on-one with a manager and the rep to look at their performance. Maybe that's how they're doing so far this month, how they're doing so far this quarter with respect to bookings, with respect to some meeting volume, where's their total opportunity ownership at right now, and then maybe a couple assets as relates to specific coaching things like, oh, and this AE has pipe hygiene issues, so we're going to look at how many untouched opportunities they have right now and how that's trending over time. But importantly, this dashboard right here is specifically for this AE one-on-one with like this rep, or maybe we just have an AE one-on-one dash that we like use for each of our reps because we haven't gotten fancy and put like those specific coaching tiles in there. But the point is like, it's for a thing. Whereas this dashboard, different dashboard, it's a stand-up dashboard. It's used to see how the SDRs are doing on their daily performance metrics. We look at it at noon, it gets fired out in Slack. It's for accountability, et cetera, et cetera. Totally different tiles that are on here. Right? So that's a really helpful way to think about this. Like the questions that are being answered are the reports, and then the dashboards and the assets are used in an operating rhythm meeting, or maybe broadcast or what have you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, oftentimes what you want is multiple views per metric. And so typically what that can be is, I like to call it a total with a trend. So a good example of this would be, how many ops does each AE own right now? That's a really important question to answer, right? How many they have right now, because it tells us how how full their pipes are, et cetera, et cetera. But we would probably want to understand the trend on that too. So we might have that, how many ops does each AE have right now? And then next to it, what we might have is a trend, like how many ops have been in their pipe on a trailing 6 months basis, group by month. And what that would allow us to do is if we see someone who's low right now in the bar chart, we can see like, oh, have they always been low? Oh no, they're ramping. It's fine. I'm not worried about it. Or like, oh man, they're a little bit low, and like, oh, Jiminy Christmas, they've been like dialing back for over the last 3 months. I really got to get engaged on that. I got to, this looks like an issue. I better tackle this issue before it becomes a problem, because if their pipeline continues to compress like that, man, you know, one sales cycle from now, two sales cycles from now, it's going to be a problem. Richard, anything else you'd want to add to this from a visualization standpoint?
I think you hit on all the points that I would typically say to my customers is like, after we go through a goal setting exercise, let's take all of these kind of discrete areas that you want your reps to focus on and build these into relevant, not only relevant views, but also get these on the right cadence. You touched on this earlier in the presentation around, here are some things you should monitor on a quarterly basis. Here are some things on a weekly basis. Some things matter on a weekly, on a monthly basis, and some less so.
Yep.
And I think a lot of times it's that split between those basic metrics that you're tracking, you know, fundamentals, meetings on calendar, calls, dials, et cetera. And then once you start getting more advanced and start thinking about shortening your deal cycles or average sales price, these are not really things you track on a weekly basis. So you don't have to sort of muddy the waters of your basics, and continue to get those on a weekly basis and check on the other ones on a monthly or quarterly. So cadence also is something that I try to think about.
Exactly, right. I think muddying the waters is exactly the right way to think about this. Like, what do I need to look at right now? So a good example of that would be like, we have pipeline, like obviously we use Atrium pretty heavily here. And so like pipeline height, like monitoring pipeline hygiene is important. We have specific assets around that. Those get broadcast on Tuesday morning, so the AEs can kind of see what's going on, and they still have the rest of the week to fix it, right? You know, looking at pipeline hygiene stuff like on a Friday morning, probably not the most effective thing in the world. Oh yeah, I guess I got to touch those ops. I should email all those people on Friday afternoon when they won't read the emails. Seems less than desirable, right? Cool. So then a variety of ways that you can use, kind of create these assets is CRM reporting, you know, business intelligence, or our favorite version of doing this is data-driven sales management software that's like quick and easy to set up. But like, you know, any way you want to skin the cat, the important thing is you got to get eyes on these things, or else it's not going to be super, like you're not going to be being able to use these assets appropriately. On that front, wanted to give a quick little commercial for Atrium. I mean, one of the things that we really care about is data-driven sales management, and we think that it's actually really important that managers be able to use metrics and data to improve the performance of their team. And so what that means is like they deserve a purpose-made solution to allow them to do so. And so what that looks like in the form of Atrium essentially is like every KPI you could possibly want for, you know, reps, teams, AEs, SDRs, AMs, CSMs, kind of the ones we talked about before. But importantly, that those metrics need to be monitored. And so what Atrium does is it continuously monitors all these metrics. You can set goals on them. It'll track progress towards those. We want early warning alerting, like, hey, I see, you know, this rep right here has a win rate problem as compared to this over here, like this person over here. And then also doing that interpretation as well. Like, hey, the reason why this rep is having a bookings problem is because his win rate is light. His win rate is light because as compared to his peers. It looks like the root cause of that is because his conversion rate out of proposal is substantially lower than the rest of his team. Let's go ahead and fix that problem right there, because that's the way that we can coach that. And so in short, what we do is we help organizations use data to improve the performance of their teams. And we do this with hundreds of customers. Cool. So that's a little bit of our advertisement there. So just a couple of examples of like what this looks like in practice, kind of like with those trends and totals. Like this is customer facing meetings here. You can kind of see our totals right here, and then trends. You can do the same thing with like opportunity ownership. Like in this case, we can see that this guy, Michael Darling here, he looks like he's fairly light over here, but like, you know, if you look at how that's been going over time, it seems like it's deteriorated pretty substantially. Same with kind of like pipeline hygiene here. This is the example I used earlier. How many untouched ops do we have right now? And then moreover, how many how many untouched ops do we have right now, and then how's that been trending over time? You got to see a fun little thing here in this graph. Can you see when this organization started getting crisp on pipeline hygiene? You kind of can, like a bunch of untouched pipe, bunch of crusty pipe, and like boop, looks like someone started paying attention to it. And then the thing is, you can do these same sort of things in ramp as well. One kind of nifty thing that kind of a unique feature to Atrium is the ability to normalize everybody's start date at time equals 0 here, and then visualize how that looks over time from a growth standpoint. And like when you're laying dashboards out, a great way to kind of think about it is like, how do I want to like tile this out before you kind of get after it? And so sometimes that can be like kind of symmetry to it, like, hey, here are the bookings by rep, like here's how many deals came in last week or how much money came in last week, and here's where we're at this month, and here's how many meetings happened last week, and then here's how many meetings have happened so far this month. So just kind of thinking through how you want to line those things up. You can also do it tabularly as well. This is actually an example of what a tabular goal view looks like in Atrium, but you can do this sort of thing in Salesforce as well. You'll have to use your eyes to interpret it versus it being tracked for you. But tabular visualizations can be helpful as well there. And so then let's talk about how you kind of get this distributed and being consumed, because the important thing is that if you have these assets and nobody's looking at them, it's like not a very helpful. It's not a very helpful thing. You got to be in front of people. You got to weave it into your operating rhythm, or else you're gonna miss issues. And so there's a couple different ways you can think about distribution and consumption. One thing that I really like to do that people kind of like don't leverage as much as they should is taking advantage of the fact that most reporting packages have unique URLs, right? So like if you want to look like, here's all of our, like these are a bunch of like Atrium assets here that I have like hyperlinked. You can do this with like sales. I actually have some Salesforce reports in here as well. But importantly, what you can see is like taking advantage of those URLs, and whether you're bookmarking it or like putting it into calendar events, or like weaving them into agendas, like meeting agendas like Google Docs or like Notion Docs or Confluence documents or what have you. Take advantage of those URLs, because that's going to make it such that you're consuming those pieces of information in those operating meetings. The other thing that can be very powerful is making sure that you're taking advantage of distributions. I like to do both. It's like a belt and suspenders thing. Like, hey, we have this sales team meeting. These are the assets that are going to go into it. And also a couple of the supporting dashboards are going to broadcast out a few hours ahead of that meeting. And just so everyone kind of has like nice awareness of this. Kind of other distribution mechanisms. TVs are always pretty funny. I'm kind of like, I don't know. I kind of like to joke about this is I call this like sales performance theater, especially now we have like lots of distributed sales organizations, like the dashboards on TVs. You would just see people like walk past them. It's like wallpaper, right? Probably the more important thing that it was doing was actually showing like, hey, we actually care about these things. Now, of course, the problem is that if you put dashboards up on TV or whatever, but like you never talk about them in meetings, or you never talk about metrics in a performance context, it's kind of like largely BS. But like in a work from home scenario right now, it's a little bit more kind of like problematic in that regard. Decks can be really helpful as well. I think a lot of leadership like take screenshots of decks and make sure that the underlying reports are hyperlinked accordingly. Of course, then there are like alerting emails as well. Richard, what are your kind of favorite distribution mechanisms there?
Love the link in a calendar meeting, calendar meeting invite. I'm a big believer in, again, every rep is different and the goal set is going to be different. And so your sort of reporting function, whether that's a dashboard or whether that's some kind of broadcast, it should align with, working with your schedule as well. And so when I have my one-on-one with my manager, we've got an Atrium dashboard locked into our meeting invite. when we have our team meetings or when we do our expansion pipeline reviews as a CSM, we've got our Atrium dashboard that we just drop right into and start talking there. And, the goals are lined up on those visualizations. So that's kind of my favorite form because it's the most in your face, it's the most upfront. And then after that, sort of delineate between email and Slack. Slack is really great for small bite-sized dashboards, mini dashboards, as we like to call them, quick activity metrics. We get our daily, what happened yesterday dashboard for activities, and those are great. Emails for a little bit more of an extended view. So yeah, love all of them.
I love that. Yeah, the mini dash in Slack where I think that's like a great example of for consumption at a point in time. And because I think what has historically, because like these assets were such a pain in the ass to construct, because you would have to file a Jira ticket against some lovely person like Richard to construct something for you in like MicroStrategy or Tableau or what have you. What would end up happening is they would get done in like large chunks versus like, hey man, like literally all I want right now is like a single tile dashboard that sends out on Monday, or sorry, like at the beginning of every morning, and it's literally like how many emails were sent yesterday and how many meetings happened yesterday. That's it, right? That's it. And like that can be a very powerful thing, and like historically they're too monolithic. Wonderful. So then the last thing we're going to touch on here is like how to troubleshoot on these fronts. So because what you're like, first you got to do that visualization stuff, but now we're going to consume it, the consumption of it. Then what we want to do is detect issues, right? We want to look for patterns to kind of tell us that there's an issue, diagnose what the root cause of that might be, and then fix it. And then we do a data-driven sales management class, or sorry, data-driven coaching class on specifically like diagnosing and then coaching and resolving these issues. This is going to be like the Cliffs Notes version of that. But in short, you want to detect, diagnose, like what might the potential problem be, communicate that. This is like what one-on-ones are just made for, right? Very different than pipeline reviews. Even though people have a tendency to only do pipeline reviews, you actually want to have performance-centric, like metric-centric one-on-ones that are separate from that. Communicate the issue, talk about what the problem might be, come up with a solution together, and then prescribe a solution, and then loop back on it. Did that solution get implemented by the account executive, by the SDR? Did it impact the metric that we were looking for to impact, et cetera? And so really kind of like the basic version of this is what we want to look for is trends will kind of give you changes over time. You can kind of see like, hey, like this person right here, their performance this is just customer facing meetings. This person in orange right here, their behavior is degrading over time. This person down here, Judy Hopps in blue, they've been kind of like low consistently over time. But looking at trended views can kind of give you a couple of like to-dos, right? So in this case, it's like, hey, let's give, what is this? Queen of Hearts. I think I need to give Queen of Hearts a high five. I should probably take a screenshot of this and Slack it over to them right now and be like, hey, you're kicking ass. Great job. Similarly, if this person can have this level of customer facing meeting volume, well, doesn't that mean that everyone probably else could as well? And then, we kind of see what's happening here with Brer Rabbit. Looks like they're kind of tailing off over time. That seems like an agenda item we need to talk about in our next one-on-one. And then if we haven't already been working with Judy Hopps here on the fact that she's consistently low with respect to our customer-facing meeting volume, that's probably something we need to get after right now. Alternatively, if we already have been having conversations with her about that in our one-on-ones, now it's the time to really ratchet those conversations up or decide that it's time to part ways because nothing's changing there. You can do the same thing with respect to setting goals as well. So like I was noting earlier, you can do this in a tabular view. Atrium will actually automatically track progress towards these goals and kind of the completion. So in this case, you can see this rep's got a pipeline hygiene problem in a big way. And maybe a little bit of an activity problem, but not super big there. But what we can see is that like there's something, everything else is on track here. So we can just tackle these things right here. One of the things that our customers particularly like about Atrium is that it does this anomaly detection automatically for them. So it's statistically monitoring these KPIs in order to help you, like, so you don't have to do it visually. It'll just tell you like, hey, look, this rep right here has 40% fewer opportunities than the other people on their team. Let's get ahead of that. Right? Or this rep right here is ramping way more proactively than the rest of his peers were at that point in time. That's fantastic. them a high five. Let's figure out how our future ramping classes can have the same sort of situation there. And again, these assets here are extremely helpful. These laminates here are extremely helpful for folks to use to do this. Wonderful. So I think we're actually out of time here. So Richard, thank you very much for joining and lending your brain power. I think everyone really appreciated it. For folks who didn't sign up earlier, I think it would be fantastic if you're interested in raising your sales management game. Sign up for this Richard Harris half-day sales management bootcamp. It normally would be $1,000 a person. Atrium is sponsoring it, so you're welcome. If you're an AE manager, SDR manager, send your SDRs. Send your SDR managers, your AE managers, etc. If you're in sales operations, you're welcome to join as well. It's really fantastic to help you raise your sales management game there. Hey, Hannah.
Hello, hello. Awesome job, the both of you. So, like Pete said, we're going to wrap things up. First, I want to thank everyone for attending. It was amazing to have you all here. Thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Atrium. They're doing amazing things. Be sure to check them out. Links are in the chat. And then thank you to Pete and Richard for providing amazing content today. The recordings and key takeaways will be available on our site shortly. And don't forget to check out our upcoming events. See you soon.